This is Part 2 Episode 163. A domainless powerhouse managed to compel a domain-wielding powerhouse to such an extent through his own attacks. This was already enough for Linshin to take pride. This blue fire phoenix spiritual stove's offensive power was a really shocking thing. The blue light vanished, and a blue fire phoenix came flying. It was clearly quite weakened, and the blue fire on his body gained in transparency, looking close to going extinct at any time. But, right at this time, that blue phoenix opened its mouth and let out a resonant phoenix cry. It formed 3 blue lines tracing from its body, all drilling their way into the shield walls. The first blue needle striking shield wall caused numerous ripples to appear on the wall, making it seem more transparent. But that blue needle also vanished without a trace, followed by the second one, which was thrust, finally surpassing shield wall's limits. A small hole appeared, but the instant it appeared, that second needle broke into pieces. However, the third needle followed quickly, disappearing in the midst of the shield wall instantly. Letting out a groan, the Holy Knight staggered to the side, and the shield wall thereupon ceased. With a flash of blue light, Linshin fell to the ground out of nowhere, standing half-squatted on a single leg. Pushing his left hand onto the ground to support the rest of his body, his dark green hair looked messy, and his body was shaking lightly, his look just as pale as a sheet of paper. Ever since reaching the 9th step of cultivation, this was his first time pushing Blue Fire Phoenix to such a level. The final 3 blue rays were undoubtedly his ultimate trump. Mixing a fire of darkness with his own Heart of Fire's attack, he obtained an ultra-powerful penetrative force. After the Blue Fire Phoenix spiritual stove had consumed the spiritual Highland-infused shield wall to the greatest extent, this final move would be the crucial point in determining whether he would achieve victory or not. Since a battle of attrition was no longer possible, he could only aim to obtain victory with his strongest attack. Regardless of the final result, at least Linshin would have displayed the most of his ability. The Holy Knight's face did not look any better off than Linshin's. On his right chest, dual green and blue flames were rising up, and his left hand was being used to cover his right chest with a resplendent golden light. But those green and blue flames burnt extremely obstinately, appearing to seep out through the gaps in the knight's fingers, the latter showing a very pained face. Linshin was gasping intensely for breaths, barely managing to look into the Holy Knight's face. Of course, he knew how powerful his ultimate move formed of these mixed flames was. Extinguishing them wouldn't be so simple, and even if the Holy Knight finally succeeded, that would cause his spiritual energy to drop to the brink of nothing, leaving him with no possibility to keep going in the tournament. I concede. Youngster, retrieve your magical ability please. The Holy Knight declared with a pained look. Concede. Linshin immediately beamed with a smile. Although he suffered a great pain due to the backlash of the Blue Fire Phoenix spiritual stove, he didn't expect to emerge victorious from that battle, and moreover in a great shape. With a lift of his right hand, his fire cloud crystal appeared, used at once as a walking stick to approach the Holy Knight. Pressing his right hand onto the elder's chest, he absorbed back the dual flames along with the hellfire needles. During the process of absorption, Linshin was slightly startled, because he found out that the true damage sustained by the Holy Knight was not as great as he had expected. There was a scorched area on his chest, but in truth, the hellfire needles might never have truly made way into his body. The Holy Knight blinked his eyes at him, before returning staggeringly to the lounge area. If Yang Haoyu had really gone all out in his match, Long Haochen would have undoubtedly been defeated, and as the captain of Bright Glimmer of Hope, his elimination would be a severe blow to the whole Bright Glimmer of Hope. But Yang Haoyu let him win, not only giving him comprehension of a lot of aspects of domains, but moreover fostering his reputation. The competition was now reaching the 5th round, with only 20 contestants left. One could say that the later matches would determine the final ranking of Bright Glimmer of Hope's side. The Holy Knight with the title of Supreme Shield, having ingeniously offered victory to Linshin, not only offered a great amount of points to Bright Glimmer of Hope, but also a seat in the top 6. Although Chen Yinge had lost her match, she had also used up Li Zhongji's strength to a great extent. Linshin having advanced, and Bright Glimmer of Hope still having 3 great powerhouses that had yet to take part, one could say that they had a bright later stage of the competition ahead. The bright light of selection flashed once again, this time selecting the blood-reeking war goddess of Bright Glimmer of Hope. As it happens, Wang Yuan Yuan's opponent turned out to be a spatial mage of the 9th step from the Mage Temple, and a domain wielder as well. The look in her eyes flickering, Wang Yuan Yuan slowly trod into the field. Although the opponents she had encountered weren't especially powerful, they were still in the upper tier of this competition. So Wang Yuan Yuan could really be said to have cut her way through thistles and thorns to finally reach this point. She had a very serene look, but a single-minded expression in her eyes. When gazing at the distant old mage, she performed a simple warrior salute. The old mage returned the salute as well. Having reached the 5th round of battles, every match was now extremely important. On the Mage Temple's side, Li Zhangji had already made it to the 6th round. If they could have someone else make it so far, at least the Mage Temple would still be able to threaten the Knight Temple. So, eliminating all the Mage Temple's contestants would benefit them the most. Starting an incantation, the old mage lifted his right hand, pointing toward Wang Yuan Yuan. In the meantime, the air twisted slightly, as the old mage's figure disappeared without basis. He really did not underestimate Wang Yuan Yuan in the least. He utilized his domain right off the bat because he had already observed Wang Yuan Yuan's strength, and was aware that this young girl was a domain-wielding powerhouse as well, thus he made the first move to take the advantage. Thin silver light floated on the twisting air, extending throughout the field. The spatial element was full of indeterminacy. Anything would get greatly affected inside that kind of domain. Wang Yuan Yuan still stood unmoving as a blood-red radiance, the blood domain, extended under her feet. The blood domain spread out, but only extended to the 3 meters around Wang Yuan Yuan. Surrounded by blood-colored curls, that blood-reeking war goddess shone brightly. The old mage kept chanting in a downcast manner, but his voice seemed to be reverberating from all directions, after going through his constantly refracting domain. Wang Yuan Yuan had no way to tell his true location. The twisting spatial domain started to show changes, and some silver light started to arise within as some cracks immediately appeared. Those black cracks looked like rapacious mouths, ready to engulf Wang Yuan Yuan's body at any time. Bright Glimmer of Hope could really be called an exceptional group, and luckily, all of them had already broken through the 9th step, some even getting domains of their own. But they lacked in experience as powerhouses. The speed of their growth was just too fast. Though their cultivation already reached the 9th step, some of them had not even experienced battles at the 8th step. To some extent they were certainly lacking in strength compared to those experienced veterans of the 6 great temples who wielded domains of their own. It was visible in Linshin's previous match, opposing him to the Supreme Shield Knight, that he had a clear inferiority in this standard. As for now, Wang Yuan Yuan's opponent was no easy prey. By clashing head-on right off the bat, Wang Yuan Yuan's odds of success would really not be high. What no one knew was that within Bright Glimmer of Hope, the only domain wielders reaching the 2nd rank of the 9th step were actually Long Haochen and Kia. Although Chen Yinge and Wang Yuan Yuan possessed a domain of their own, they had actually only reached the 1st rank of the 9th step of cultivation. Their own domain was comprehended in the process of over 4 years of deep meditation, brought about miraculously. But beyond that miracle, the shortage in their cultivation was still a clear thing. Otherwise, Chen Yinge may not necessarily have lost to Li Zhangji, or at least have inconvenienced him to an even greater degree. As the temple's great gathering did not even permit any equipment, Bright Glimmer of Hope's shortages became even more visible. That's why Wang Yuan Yuan took a different approach from the beginning, by choosing to go for another type of battle. She was standing motionless, but actually maintained all her thoughts in the battle, looking for a hole in the opponent's strategy to bring her a victory in one blow. The powerful spatial domain started to compress Wang Yuan Yuan's residing space, the spatial cracks growing more and more numerous. From outside the barrier, it appeared that over thousands of spatial gaps had appeared in the field, seemingly crushing anything in their contact instantly. So, what's to be done? What response will Wang Yuan Yuan choose? A lot of spectators had these same questions arise in them. Finally, a first spatial crack made contact with Wang Yuan Yuan's blood domain. With a swishing sound, like that of ice melted by a red-hot piece of iron, Wang Yuan Yuan's blood domain bubbled up violently, and that spatial crack disappeared immediately. But by paying attention, one would notice that those spatial cracks were ripping away some of the blood energy released by the blood domain. This was just a beginning. Following that first one, even more of these headed towards Wang Yuan Yuan. Swishing sounds kept resounding, one spatial crack after another disappearing swiftly after contact with the blood domain. But it was apparent that Wang Yuan Yuan's blood domain was rippling violently, losing its might. The other party used a mix of magic and domain, while she only kept defending passively through her domain. The contrast was rather obvious. The two parties' domains kept clashing, during which a lot of spectators were already shaking their head. Even Li Zhangji had a smile appearing on his face, muttering aloud, "Is this girl looking for an opening? How could she even find one?" Old Yu's domain gave him the title Master of Constant Changes. There's no set rule at all. She wants to rely on her domain's explosive force to make a surprise attack, but her pains will only get deeper and deeper. With the thought of having one more powerhouse from the mage temple to make it through, Li Zhongji couldn't help but get into a better and better mood. Maybe his spiritual energy will really be replenished completely by the next round as well. However, because of his use of 2 great domain techniques, recovering to his peak by then would be really challenging. Time passed second by second, during which Wang Yuan Yuan's blood domain was still very powerful even when faced against an attack combining spatial domain and magic, enduring tenaciously. At least several thousand cracks had already disappeared in front of the blood domain. In fact, these spatial cracks were all spatial instabilities created through spatial magic, preventing any teleportation. Not only was the space extremely unstable, but furthermore could crumble at any time, all the spatial cracks being filled with an extremely strong swallowing force. Absorbing things was none other than one of its greatest powers. Throwing oneself inside is simply akin to suicide. But who could expect Wang Yuan Yuan to make such a choice? This girl was just too staunch. Could it be that she would stake her own life rather than get defeated at the hands of the mage temple? After all, based on the temple's Great Gatherings rules, killing one's opponent would automatically get oneself eliminated. Even Li Zhongji had a look of complete shock upon catching sight of this scene. But the next instant, everyone here realized their own mistake. In a flash of bloodlight, Wang Yuan Yuan already appeared in another spot. This very instant, the numerous surrounding spatial cracks started to get more and more chaotic. Because the whole field was filled of spatial cracks to the brim, when Wang Yuan Yuan disappeared, only indistinct flashes of red could be seen in their midst. But something no one could see was occurring at that very moment. The spatial cracks started to disappear one after another, gradually revealing the situation in the center of the grounds. Then a breathtaking sight came. Wang Yuan Yuan calmly stood there, her palm pressed onto the old mage's head. The latter did not utilize further magic, only looking at Wang Yuan Yuan full of incomprehension. "How did you achieve that?" the old mage asked, full of incomprehension. "This was inside my domain, and with so many spatial cracks around. You cannot possibly have used any teleporting ability. I know that you have a spiritual stove enabling teleportation, and it is something for which I have already accounted. I don't understand how you could pass through the spatial cracks and end up right in front of me. My domain and magic are completely devoid of any regular pattern." Wang Yuan Yuan calmly answered, "There is no ability devoid of the slightest flaw. It is because your spatial cracks were boosted thanks to your domain that so many of them had appeared simultaneously. It is indeed as you say, these spatial cracks are devoid of any regular patterns. But you have forgotten that they come from the same domain, and that is their common point. All of these cracks that were created from the same domain are all linked to each other, with spatial channels able to link them instantly like a spider web. What I did was all calculated. I picked a spatial channel that could connect me right in front of you, and that was all I needed." Wang Yuan Yuan had said that as if it was very simple, but the old mage was greatly shocked. How could that be possible? That would require a massive amount of energy. Most of all, with just a little mistake, you would be torn in the midst of spatial ripples, or drifting in an endless space. No, this couldn't happen to me. Right, as you say, my spiritual stove cannot be used in your domain. But I can protect myself in a fixed spot by using my domain's defenses. This is also why I remained purposefully unmoving for so long, or else. The old mage solemnly declared, "I have lost and am thoroughly convinced in my defeat. You may have won with your cleverness, but in this world, people capable of such intelligence and steadiness are far too few. You are bound to be respected in the future warrior temple." Saying that, the old mage solemnly bent to Wang Yuan Yuan, before turning back with a smile on his face. When she came out from the stadium, the first thing that welcomed her back was Chen Ying's warm hug. You've won. Yuan Yuan, you're really awesome." Chen Ying spiritedly hugged Wang Yuan Yuan, who swayed visibly, shutting her eyes in her embrace, and muttering in a feeble voice, "Help me get moving." This fight's whole process looked really simple, but only Wang Yuan Yuan and the old mage knew how pressuring the battle was to her. How about the process of the massive pressure brought upon her? Under such a pressure, she had to perform continuous calculations to get closer to her goal. Though her spiritual stove's position was fixed before she tore through the spatial crack, that was still in no way devoid of danger to her life. Since she wanted to beat the enemy and achieve victory whilst paying attention to her own safety, all these factors together meant her burdens were far too many. So far, out of 3 of the 6 battles, Bright Glimmer of Hope had already achieved 2 victories, and occupied 2 seats in the top 6. The golden light of selection surged out and landed once again, shrouding Kia another time. This time, Her opponent was from the spiritual temple. The fourth battle of the fifth individual round began. This summoner Kia had to face was a tall elder. All those who made it to the fifth round were powerhouses of the current age. The displays of strength of this summoner in the previous battles were seen clearly by everyone from Bright Glimmer of Hope. His strongest specialty was his contracted beast, a dragon, a genuine dragon. This summoner was the only dragon summoner out of the whole spiritual temple. When facing this dragon summoner, the pressure on Kia as she was not allowed to use any sort of equipment was really great. Although this summoner had yet to enter the domain-wielding realm, his summoned gigantic dragon was already a domain-wielding powerhouse. A shrill dragon cry came as a blue gigantic dragon appeared in the stadium. The dragon-summoning elder was seated upright on its back. To vanquish him, one would first need to beat his summoned gigantic dragon. The dragon summoner grabbed the dragon's horn with a hand, shifting his sight toward Kia, his opponent. This blue gigantic dragon was of water attribute, and reached a length of a full 50 meters. Even as it stood within the entire field, that was still a huge monster. Kia's body flashed, all traces of her disappearing inside the field. She knew that this battle would be an extremely difficult one. Without a way to use the sickle of the god of death and tower of eternity, her strength would be excessively restricted. Beating this domain-wielding gigantic dragon would really be quite a challenge. It would be another story if she could use the 7 arts of the god of death, but right now she could only beat the mount before the rider. The summoner's look became stagnant, connecting his thoughts with the water dragon. A dragon cry reverberated from the sky as an ice-blue ring spread out from the top of his head. Generally speaking, ring-type abilities would cover a limited range, but this ice dragon's ring seemed limitless, extending through the whole stadium's barrier and encompassing the whole audience as well. Kia's invisibility naturally left no traces under those circumstances. Her figure flashing, she appeared onto the field, but suddenly disappeared once again in mid-stride before the ring approached her, sweeping past it while leaving no traces. Spatial shuttling? This was a powerful ability that assassins would gain starting from a certain level of cultivation. The dragon summoner let out a faint smile. This was not his first time facing an assassin, and he naturally knew how to respond. The wings on the water dragon's back spread out, a terrifying blue water tide erupting from these wings. This was truly a perilous situation. A tidal surge of water essence attacked the whole stadium, reaching every corner in a flash. No matter where Kia would appear next, she would have to endure this water wave's attack. Furthermore, under the influence of such a massive water elemental attack, changes also started to affect the space. The closer one was to the core, the more intense these water waves would get. In the empty space, a crack quietly appeared in front of the water dragon, and Kia strode out. Pure halations dispersed from her body, as the purifying force condensed into a sickle of the god of death which struck at the water dragon. It wasn't that she did not want to attack the dragon summoner, but in truth the water dragon's released water essence was far too massive. A blue barrier had long since enveloped his body, so if Kia chose to stubbornly attack him, the water dragon's greatest attack would surely follow in response. The water dragon's eyes lit up, opening its large mouth to spit a breath attack. In the meantime, the surrounding water essence suddenly turned into a massive whirlpool, pulling Kia's body toward its direction. A massive water pillar arose from beneath, attacking from 2 sides simultaneously. An ice-cold glimmer flashed in Kia's eyes and a white halo released from her body. That soft-looking white not only stopped the water dragon's spit, but purified all the nearing water essence as well. That was Kia's domain of purification. The water dragon let out a howl, its massive figure shivering slightly, clearly feeling a great apprehension in front of Kia's domain of purification, but it still launched its own domain in the meantime. An azure color encompassed the whole stadium, the water essence pulsing excitedly as if alive. Drop after drop, the water condensed into little dragons, swiftly emerging from the domain. Looking at them, they appeared extremely real, all charging at Kia. But everything surrounding their bodies suddenly turned illusory, as if forming a water blockade separating the dragon from Kia. This was a means used by the dragon summoner for self-defense, wielding a part of the domain's power defensively. After all, Kia was the only remaining assassin in the temple's great gathering, and possessed a domain of her own. What if the domain's force was suddenly sealed off? The dragon summoner's force was this gigantic dragon. All his abilities were related to this gigantic dragon, the two of them complementing each other. His spirit united with the water dragon, commanding the latter in battle. Not only did it boost the water dragon's technical aspects, but it also connected his spiritual energy with the latter's, the result approaching the 300,000. Facing the assault of the mini water dragons, Kia's eyes lit up. The light of purification was as if limitless, spreading through the light of purification swiftly. In the meantime, she raised her right hand, stretched forward. There seemed to be some stubbornness in her look, as well as great expectations. The dispersed petals started to shrink, gathering onto her palm. In this process, the surroundings of Kia's body were like a terrible whirlpool. The mini water dragons from that domain only managed to fly within a certain range of her body before smashing to pieces instantly, disappearing and turning back into water essence. However, the light of purification surrounding Kia did not spread further, leaving it unable to affect the water dragon's domain. The sight of those white petals gathering rapidly was pretty. Kia floated in midair, like an immortal. Her purification attribute had a very great characteristic: to remain unaffected by perturbation from other elements. This wouldn't change even if the other party were to utilize domain force. Even if it were even denser, water essence was in the end water essence. In circumstances where the light of purification had not launched any attacks, the water essence had no way to proceed beneath it. The water dragon's sight seemed slightly frenetic. It perceived an immense threat from Kia. Ra. Going past the light of purification would require a direct clash. Elemental essence was of no use, but skills could be used. All the mini-dragons in the domain roared, and immediately, everything in the water dragon domain lit up. The scope of the massive domain started to extend to the whole stadium, turning into a massive whirlpool. Every water dragon turned into a light flowing through the whirlpool, disappearing in the midst of this massive domain alongside the summoner and his water dragon. This wide whirlpool had a terrifying pulling force. Every circulating light charged toward Kia's domain of purification, producing a violent explosion, as well as some intense fluctuations in the white light on its surface. The spiral's rotation speed grew faster and faster, the impact force coming stronger and stronger. But this instant, that lotus flower in Kia's hand bloomed. Domain technique, Flourishing Lotus Flower. On the last time when that lotus flower had made its appearance in the Tower of Eternity, it was not with its full power. But this time, Kia deployed it fully with no second thoughts. This was Kia's domain technique that she was not in full control of, as well as her strongest attack at her disposal without the sickle of the god of death and Tower of Eternity. But would this domain technique be enough to defeat the water dragon? After Flourishing Lotus Flower came out, a purifying force was released, then, it slowly arose above Kia's head. Immediately, Kia, who was originally sent flying upwards in the water dragon's whirlpool, returned to normal in a flash, and the Flourishing Lotus Flower kept blooming above Kia's head. A ring of extreme white suddenly extended, causing every spectator in the stadium to immediately feel bewildered. Even the defensive barrier's protection seemed ineffectual. Gra! The water dragon's cry was filled with great panic, because it realized, to its horror, that this ring of white light from Flourishing Lotus Flower only passed through its domain and kept expanding. Water essence was of no use in blocking it. Or perhaps no ability would be able to stop its advance. Even the dragon's extremely powerful soul's force seemed to be seeping out from its body. No mistake, this was the purifying force's most terrifying aspect. What was purified was not the body, but the soul. Kia's Flourishing Lotus Flower stripped out soul force, and had extreme boosting effects. No matter how strong you are, if your soul is wounded, that is some irreparable damage. The water dragon did not dare attack Kia further, and contracted its massive domain, turning it into an immense sparkling barrier surrounding its body. In the meantime, its two dragon horns flashed in thunderous icy blue, protecting its own head. At the very moment, all its focus was put on defending its own soul, as well as that of the dragon summoner on its head. Once spiritual energy density reaches a certain level, there's not much to do anymore. The ice dragon perceived that Kia's domain of purification was actually not really suppressing its own water attribute, but its undead attribute. If it was an undead creature, even if it were twice as strong, those flourishing lotus flowers would have scattered it to ashes in a flash. But as its water attribute soul did not have much of the dark aspects, it was not purified too violently. Damage to one's soul is always a very dangerous thing. It had to defend against that at all cost. Flourishing Lotus Flower's white ring of light finally attacked the water dragon's barrier. The instant the two parties clashed, a bizarre chirping sound reverberated through the stadium. That very instant, all the onwatchers present felt their brains filled in a flash with the chirping sounds before blank scenes flashes through their minds, taking several seconds to recover. That feeling seemed to be seeping out from their soul. It felt like after swaying forth outside for a bit, it returned to their body. This kind of experience was in no way appreciated. These powerhouses from the 6 great temples that Kia had previously faced couldn't help but feel full of shock. How could they have thought that Seir actually had such means at her disposal? This domain technique was just too terrifying. For the defensive barrier to show such a strong reaction, how terrible would it be if that was a direct attack? The dragon summoner and water dragon reached their own conclusion. Inside the stadium a strange scene came to pass. The water dragon and dragon summoner both went stiff, as above their head a blurry figure appeared, shaped the same as them, only a lot smaller. Transparent, lifeless, stiff, and even full of shock. This was without a doubt their souls' states after flourishing lotus flowers took effect. The water dragon's defensive barrier took effect to some extent, but it actually looked not too powerful. Their domain was being dispersed at an astonishing speed as well, along with the defensive barrier. However, after utilizing flourishing lotus flower, Kia also seemed out of strength. Her body swayed in the air, narrowly falling down, but a blue cane appeared in her hand, finally supporting her body. Although from the paleness of her face and her body's lack of spirit, one could see that she already didn't have much fighting strength left. However, she still had a firm look directed at the water dragon and dragon summoner in the air, as if waiting for something to happen. The expelled spirits slowly returned, having in the end not suffered a total purification by flourishing lotus flower. In the end, the water dragon and dragon summoner had joined their spirit force as one, adding that to the overall defensive effects of the domain, so although Kia's blow had great effects on their souls, it was unlikely to go as far as to disperse them. After a dozen seconds, the dragon summoner and water dragon's souls came back to their senses, both out of breath. Even if the water dragon was very powerful, it was still instantaneously weakened to such an extent that it was unable to even maintain its spiritual wings. Falling from the sky and dropping to the ground, it caused a violent bang as the defenses surrounding his body and his domain shattered to pieces. Its soul was weakened such that it was totally unable to control these forces. So who won and who lost? The spectators in the Alliance's Great Stadium were basically all powerhouses from the 6 great temples. But this instant, almost no one could tell out the outcome of the match. Kia's domain technique benefited in its great unexpectedness, forcibly breaking the water dragon and dragon summoner's joint domain technique, and damaging their very souls. But from the looks of it, Kia did not have any energy left either. Also, the water dragon and dragon summoner should take a bit faster to recover than her. Just as everyone was full of doubts, a white figure suddenly appeared behind the water dragon without any sound, and in a flash was atop the water dragon, a flash of sharp light aiming at the dragon summoner's throat. This timing was really ideal. The dragon summoner having just come back to his senses, and still under the shock from the water dragon's fall, this was a time of thorough distraction. Only when the sharp white glow had reached his throat did he finally react, but that was clearly too late. If that white figure wanted to kill him, he would already be dead. That white figure was clearly Kia, but an illusory Kia, whose sickle of the god of death was lightly pressed against the dragon summoner's throat, before slowly dissipating. Who could expect this? It was only when the victor was already determined that the dragon summoner had finally reacted. This image was visibly a remnant left from before Kia had utilized her domain technique. In other words, she had kept stealthily a doppelganger under the state of invisibility. But which other assassin could maintain an invisible doppelganger? No matter what the dragon summoner was thinking, this match was ultimately his loss. He may not necessarily lose out in strength against the equipment-less Kia, but her victory lay in her bizarre flourishing lotus flower and great planning. She knew very clearly that her flourishing lotus flower came with a massive consumption, stopping her from even continuing to battle. Her doppelganger's preparation was for this very moment. In ordinary circumstances, her doppelganger would by no means be able to injure the opponent, but, because of the shock from the lotus flower's attack, the water dragon's domain was shattered, and thus the dragon summoner was at his weakest state. It was only in search of the best opportunity that Kia had been looking concentratedly at the dragon summoner so far. One could only admit that Kia's strength was really a great deal. Being the saint daughter of Samsara, a god's chosen one, she had powerful abilities beyond the reach of ordinary assassins. For instance, maintaining her doppelganger after using invisibility, and with such great concealment. Even the water dragon's domain did not probe its existence, thus making the summoner's defeat no injustice. Her blue cane tapping on the ground, Kia slowly walked out. The match had already been concluded, and of course, as one of the 6 great temple's powerhouses, the dragon summoner naturally could not act shamelessly, especially with Chen Zidian watching. At this point of the competition, bright glimmer of hope had ended as great victors of the individual competition. 4 spots out of the 6 matches actually belonged to them. Long Haochen stood at the great stadium's entrance, calmly waiting for Kia's return. Looking at her blue cane tapping on the ground, Long Haochen's eyes were full of warmth, visibly recalling the scene of himself sending off Kia every day back then. Kia joined Long Haochen's side, a smile on her face. Her hand pulled by Haochen's, she was supported back to their seats. This time, the light of selection kept going on as Long Haochen unconsciously raised his head. Only the last 2 matches were left for this round, and Bright Glimmer of Hope's captain had yet to take part. However, this light of selection did not target any of the Bright Glimmer of Hope squad, but 2 other competitors, one being a powerhouse from the Night Temple, and the other one from the Spiritual Temple. Therefore, the last match would naturally be between Long Haochen and the last person from the Mage Temple. Seeing that this match was not his own, Long Haochen waved his hand at Han Yu. Han Yu had long since received Long Haochen's instructions. Because he had been eliminated beforehand, he was not inside the competitor's booth, but in the more distant spectators' lounge. Having received Long Haochen's signal, Han Yu lightly nodded, expressing his understanding, before slowly shutting his eyes. No one noticed that among Bright Glimmer of Hope's ranks, Kia, Wang Yuan Yuan and Linshin had a golden dot of light on their backs. But by leaning against their seats, this light was thoroughly concealed. Only Bright Glimmer of Hope's people realized what was happening. These were the effects of Han Yu's spiritual stove of light's blessings. Along with his rise in cultivation, Han Yu's spiritual stove of light's blessings had evolved 2 times in total. The current light's blessings was no longer just recovery in a set area. More importantly, Han Yu's blessings could be transmitted to the others through the soul-sharing chains. In a certain range, through the chains he was able to assist his comrades from Bright Glimmer of Hope in recovering spiritual energy. And the fewer the targets, the faster the recovery assistance. The reason why Long Haochen did not signal Han Yu before was naturally because his spiritual stove could still only be used once a day, so it had to be done in the most crucial instant. Now that the 5th match had already started, Linshin, Wang Yuan Yuan and Seo all had massive consumptions. And after that, he would have to take part in the 6th match as well, after which the 6th round would immediately start, without leaving them any time for recovery. If Long Haochen had just been picked by the light of selection to take part in the 5th match, maybe he could delay the use of the spiritual stove of light's blessings a bit as well to profit, but now was clearly the best timing in this situation. The reason why he shifted the activation in advance was that, as he had the Heart of Eternity, his spiritual energy's recovery was far above the others. No one could deny that Han Yu's boost was a form of cheating. But Long Haochen was tolerant to that, as everything he was doing was for the sake of allowing the Temple Alliance to develop still further. This state of dispersion of the Temple Alliance had already gone on for 6,000 years, and with each of the 6 great temples having its own authority, was a deep-rooted system. They had very complex relationships between each other, and to put that to an end would be a really challenging thing. The only way would be to make them all compromise, but even should it succeed, the qualitative changes would actually most likely not be too huge either. So, Long Haochen had already come to the conclusion that what he had to do was to make Bright Glimmer of Hope really stand above the crowd in this temple's great gathering. Although it had weak foundations, and could only rely on the few of them, they also had their unique advantages. Even after omitting the positions each of them held in their own temple, they had naturally good dispositions. After having experienced so many things, and coming to that point today, Long Haochen believed this to be his unshirkable responsibility. For the sake of his plan, a brand new alliance ought to be founded, where he, as the sign of light, had to become one of the leading figures. Through Bright Glimmer of Hope's drive and strength, they would be the greatest contributors in the alliance's reorganization. This video will end here.